You believe in Jesus? Yes, I do. Well, you're going to meet him.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Steel Creed, where we connect faith and reason to ordinary experience by steel-manning aspects of Christendom. Today, we will be continuing our discussion about the least worst life. And joining me is my good friend Nate.
Greetings, Ian. Greetings, listeners, and greetings, fellow heretics. Looking forward to our discussion today.
Yeah, well, we were going to have this discussion until you completely derailed the last discussion that we had. So, when last we left our heroes...
Previously on X-Men.
The whole point of the last show, which was The Least Worst Life, was that... So to recap, roughly where we are at this point is that we've made an argument that Christ rose from the dead. We made the argument that Christ claimed to be God. Given those two facts, we're going to go with the idea that, well, Christ is God, and since he's the creator of the universe, perhaps we ought to pay attention to what he says. And so the first part of that were the episodes about the kingdom of God, where Nate laid out, say, the major themes of Christ's ministry here on earth. Do you think that's a
accurate,
reasonable
I would say.
Summary? Okay.
Yeah.
And then the last episode we did, The Least Worst Life, Part 1, was basically based on something that was stuck in my craw for years growing up in the church, where you get this idea that, oh my goodness, the Christian life is just so hard. It's just full of travails and trials, and everyone else is having a good time, but you just got to keep keeping on, but it's worth it in the afterlife. And so this is summarized nicely with Pacino's speech at the end of The Devil's Advocate, which we played last time. And so the only thing that I was trying to get across last time was really, admittedly, it was a negative conversation in the sense that I was trying to rebut what Pacino was saying. I was trying to rebut the idea that the Christian life is full of trials and travails and that it's no fun and it's just way more fun and easy to live in the moment for pleasure and things like that.
I mean, as Seeger said, only the good die young.
That's right. But Seeger didn't say that.
That wasn't Bob Seeger?
No.
Who was that? Billy Joel. What?
It was Billy Joel.
Idiot. As Billy Joel said.
Only
the good die young.
Yes, and then Iron Maiden reiterated it with Only the Good Die Young on Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, but that was not a cover, that was just their own song. But anyway, but then you brought up during the episode, it's a very fair question, right? Which is to paraphrase, well, it's not to paraphrase, but to quote Francis Schaeffer, how should we then live? And it's a fair question, right? So I'm coming in, I'm saying Pacino's full of nonsense, that Daniel Tosh is also full of nonsense, that you need more than a wave runner to get through life in any sort of happy and meaningful way. How then shall we live? Francis Schaeffer, Nate.
The Germans, they...
Yes. So
Swiss, I guess, technically.
Schaeffer or you?
Schaeffer.
Okay.
He did his ministry out of Geneva, Switzerland.
Gotcha. Okay. And it reminded me, not that I'm comparing myself to Chesterton, it just reminded me of Chesterton. So to both of our listeners, if you haven't read Chesterton's Apologia, I highly recommend it. You have to take it in order. And the order of his Apologia is Heretics, Orthodoxy, and Everlasting Man. So in Heretics, Chesterton is basically doing what I was doing in the previous episode, which is each chapter of Heretics is him taking apart the philosophy of someone who was active during his life. So, for instance, there's
who was not a Christian.
Right, yes. So, for instance, like Shaw gets his own chapter. George Bernard Shaw gets his own chapter in there. And then, so he writes heretics, and then he writes orthodoxy, but he starts orthodoxy by saying, the only possible excuse for this book is to answer a challenge. Even a bad shot is dignified when he accepts a duel. I love Chesterton.
Entertaining.
Yes. He's entertaining. So this is what's interesting about Chesterton in my mind, or one of many things, which is that Christians today will quote him, but they'll quote him with a certain solemnity, right? And so then when you go and read him, you're expecting a solemn sort of declaration or essay. But he's very playful in his essays. And so, I don't know, it took me a minute when reading him initially to get that. To like, oh, this guy's, he's making good points, but he's also having fun while he's doing it.
Yeah, he's very entertaining.
He's very entertaining, but again, if your introduction to him is just cloaked in solemnity, you're like, you might not get it the first time. At least I didn't. I'll speak only for myself. All right. Even a bad shot is dignified when he accepts a duel. When some time ago I published a series of hasty but sincere papers under the name of Heretics, several critics, for whose intellect I have warm respect, I may mention specifically Mr. G.S. Street, that it was all very well for me to tell everybody to affirm his cosmic theory, but that I had carefully avoided supporting my precepts with example. I will begin to worry about my philosophy, said Mr. Street, when Mr. Chesterton has given us his. It was perhaps an incautious suggestion to make to a person only too ready to write books upon the feeblest provocation.
That's a joke for all of you guys 100 years behind the language.
Right. I mean, and that's so very British, too, right?
Yes.
But after all, though Mr. Street has inspired and created this book, he need not read it. If he does read it, he will find that in its pages I have attempted in a vague and personal way, in a set of mental pictures, rather than in a series of deductions, to state the philosophy in which I have come to believe. I will not call it my philosophy, for I did not make it. God and humanity made it, and it made me. And so that's from Chesterton and the beginning of orthodoxy. So now we come then to my own apologetic, I suppose, in a certain way, or rather affirmation of how one ought to live. And so this is going to be developed from a few, say, empirical observations and a few philosophical observations. And so the first one is I want to reiterate what I said in the last episode, that something is perfect if it always fulfills the purposes for which it was created. And so I think even in our own lives, when we construct things to help us, when we construct tools, if you consider the perfect automobile, if you consider the perfect computer program, the perfect broom, whatever, is that if it's doing its job, if it's fulfilling the purpose for which it's created, you're like, this is the greatest broom in the world. But if you're willing to admit to that, then sort of necessity, you have accidentally given part of the game away, which is that perfection then is of necessity mysterious. And why is that the case? Is because it's tied to personality. Is that purpose is derived from personality and is therefore bound to faith. And so whenever you're speaking of perfection, you are of necessity somehow relating to faith because you are talking about the purposes of an individual.
Okay.
And so, as an example then, well, actually, I'll just continue along these lines. And so this brings us to a second partition. So the first partition that we discussed in the conceptual landscape was the partition between facts and values. It's the is-ought partition. And that's a well-known partition, say, the is-ought. That's well-known in philosophical circles. But there's another partition which, as far as I know, I'm not saying other people haven't come up with this, What I am saying is I haven't read it any other place, but I found it useful in my own mind. And it's the ineffable, articulated, and measurable partition. And so here's what I mean by that, which is that one of the things that so again, the impetus for this episode is also rooted in my frustration with things. As I examine myself, that's often the impetus for a lot of things, is my frustration with things. And one of my frustrations is, and tell me your experience with this, Nate, but when I was growing up, people would speak about God's will as though it was fairly straightforward. It's like, well, because, like when you're in high school, your field of potential is rather limited. But, when you're approaching senior year, people are like, well, what are you going to do with your life? Are you going to go to college, or are you going to pursue a trade, or go into the military, or you get married, not get married? To whom are you going to get married? You need to seek the Lord's will. Have you sought the Lord's will? And they would speak about this as though it was like very straightforward. Like, well, I didn't know what to do, so I sought the Lord's will, and I got a letter in the mail a week later, and this was what I had to do, and so I went and did it. What's your experience with this stuff?
Yeah, I do think there might be some simplification around that concept. I was actually today listening to a really good interview. Russell Brand interviewed Jonathan Rumi, who plays Jesus on The Chosen.
Okay.
And they were kind of...
Sure, why not? We live in the best timeline.
I mean, they were kind of discussing this concept a little bit, because like Jonathan Rumi spent like 10, 15 years as a, broke actor in LA before, he kind of hit pay dirt with The Chosen. And when he got The Chosen, he didn't know it was going to be pay dirt, But what they were talking about was the relationship with Jesus. They were talking about, how's your relationship with Jesus different? Because Jonathan Rumi's a Christian.
Right.
And they were talking about how, how do you know everything's going to work out?
Right.
Roughly similar to what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
And he said, part of what he said for himself was like, there was a couple of different things. One big thing was there was this surrendering thing over to God. Mm-hmm. He was talking about how there was this point when he was thousands of dollars in debt, was behind on rent payments, hadn't gotten paid, couldn't even like he would do like things like DoorDash and stuff. He wasn't even making a lot of money off of that for whatever reason.
Right.
And one day he came home and he had 4 checks in the mail from, various and sundry,
previous gigs,
that like one was like royalties from like an animation gig he had done like 2 years previously or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
wait. Few years?
Yeah, it was like something that had been like a few years before that they had forgotten to pay him for.
That's a heck of an accounts payable department.
Absolutely. So, and what he did was he had like just like the day before even had just been like on his knees praying to the Lord, like, hey, I surrender. Like, I don't know why you brought me here to LA. Why'd you bring me here?
Right.
To be broke and and just can't even eat and so he like filmed himself opening these checks, and they were, one check's for like $200, one's for $150, one's for $800, and he's like, this is basically, it could have been $1 million.
Right.
He just had the feeling like, okay, God's gonna get me through. I just need to surrender and trust Him. And then he also just talked about that with God, just like anything else, it's a relationship. Mm-hmm. Like you have to be engaged. If the Christian, especially in our modern day lexicon, we very much focus on the aspect of you need a personal relationship with God. Well, just like any other relationship, if you're not engaging that relationship, and if God has something for you, if you're not engaging the relationship, you're never gonna, have that revealed to you, because mm-hmm. you're not bothering to seek from God, what He wants for you. And I don't think it's purely just like, hey, God, what do you want me to do with my life?
Sure.
It can be relationships have multiple aspects. There's aspects of intimacy around like, I'm looking for someone to comfort me. Well, God can do that for us. I'm looking for someone to listen to me. Well, God can also do that for us.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily play into the idea of finding God's will. But if you do want to find God's will, then you should be spending time talking to him, engaging him, doing the things that he would want you to do.
Sure.
So I think just the general idea of you need to be looking to find God's will, or if it's just out there. I think the one other thing that I would say is it's just not as simple as there's something out there for you to do. I don't know if this falls into your ineffable category, but I don't think there is some type of preordained, I built Ian just for this particular thing. I think when we say purpose, that's not exactly what we're saying. I do think Ian has a certain set of skills that he is...
But what I do have are a very particular set of skills. Skills I've acquired over a very long career.
Yeah. So, and they don't involve any Romanian gangsters. But, there's many different ways that God can use you. But there's also many different ways that God probably doesn't intend to use you. I guess that's what I would say.
Well, I guess my thinking is that, again, going back to my adolescence, is that people would speak about this stuff as though it was relatively straightforward to discern it. And just for the fun of it, I'll refrain from naming names. But as I was preparing for this, I noticed popped up in my YouTube feed, something about God's will, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'll listen to it. And sure enough, it was just another one of these things like that, it's full of spiritual language, but at the end of it, coming back to one of the premises of the show, right, is action. It's like when I get done listening to the sermon, it's like, well, then what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to act?
Let me ask you this question, because giving a sermon on this in a particular way is a action that these people are taking.
Yeah, it is.
What are they trying to do by preaching a sermon like this? What are they trying to affect in their listeners? What type of influence are they seeking to have? What are they trying to influence you to do?
I don't know. And I'm saying this from all my years. I don't know. I think that they're doing the best they can, but I don't think that they have thought through that advice needs to be at the level of action. It's always, at least, again, I'm only speaking from my own experience. For me, all of these sermons, all of these talks from the youth leaders, or if you go to a Christian college, the professors at the front of the classroom, they're also ethereal. I don't know what to do with them. And I've never known what to do with them. So wasn't necessarily going to bring this up, but here we are. So in the church that I used to attend, let's see, how would this work? In the church I used to attend, the pastor would get off the fifth, like if there was a month with 5 Sundays, he would get the 5th Sunday off. And then just someone from the congregation would preach. Small church, 150 people, something like that. And so I gave 4 sermons while I was there. And one of them was called On Decisions. And this is in 2015, so this is like, but as I read this again, preparing for the show, I was like, this is very prototypical of Steel Creed, the idea that it's focused on action. And so I start with it. I'm just going to read this. This comes from Sink the Bismarck. You ever seen that one?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think I watched that in history class.
Yeah, I mean, you're the history guy, so I figured you would love this film. It's a great film. I love it. But near the opening of it, you got some Brit and you got some Limey and 2 of his subordinates. And the commanding officer says,
"Now, gentlemen, they'd have 4 available passages, wouldn't they? There's the Denmark Strait, the passage south of Iceland, the Faroe-Shetland passage, and the Fair Island Channel between the Orkneys and the Shetlands. Anyone care to place a bet?"
What about the Iceland-Faroes Channel, sir? Not too near our bases and plenty of room for maneuver.
Well, why wouldn't you take the nearest exit? Fair Island Channel's only a few hundred miles.
Much too close to our air patrol. You're of no help to me, gentlemen. All you're saying is it could be any one of the four.
And that's how I kind of feel as, just a guy rolling through life trying to sort this stuff out. So I mean, Sink to Bismarck has a great example of the kind of conflicting opinions you'll get from people about how you ought to live, how you ought to seek the Lord's will. But it gets even worse. So all you have to do is pass through a room containing some daytime programming. Have you ever watched daytime television?
It's been a very, very long time.
But like sometimes you'll see it like, I don't know, you're just like in a waiting room at the doctor's office or something like that.
Sure.
It's just awful. It's so bad. And so what you'll find is some stooge dispensing advice based on the proverb du jour. And here's the thing, I would be more sympathetic to such instruction if it was not punctuated by flagrant inconsistency. So here are a few examples.
Are we going to get some good Dr. Phil here? Like, what are we getting here?
Well, I mean, so this is just like, I'm going to read you proverbs that you know, but I'm going to put them back to back. You should not judge a book by its cover, but the clothes make the man. 2 heads are better than one, but too many cooks spoil the broth. Birds of a feather flock together, but opposites attract. Absence makes the heart grow fonder until you realize that something that is out of sight is out of mind. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread, but you need to strike while the iron is hot. Practice makes perfect, but no one is perfect. It's like, come on, man. And probably my favorite observation on this comes from Judith Martin. Are you familiar with her?
No.
Miss Manners. That was her pen name. So, in a response to a letter decrying the inherent sexism of wedding and baby showers, noted that few of our social institutions can bear severe philosophical scrutiny. And that seems to be the case, is that you have these proverb collections, and even Ecclesiastes 3 drove me insane, because, again, this is the difference between action and truth. It's the difference between proposition and volition, which is that Ecclesiastes 3 is true. There is a time to laugh and a time to weep. There is a time to kill, and there's a time for all of that stuff, right? Those are true statements, but they're not helpful.
They don't tell you when.
Right, because they don't tell you when. They don't help you act. And so you need something more concrete to act. And so that, among other reasons, is why I came up with the ineffable, articulated, measurable partition. And so here's what that is. It's exactly what you think it is, which is that, getting back to facts and values, in both cases, both facts and values, for some of them, an articulation exists. You can describe verbally certain phenomena. You might say you love your wife, for instance, right? And that's something that's articulated. But then there are other things which you know to be true, or you think that are true, and on which you act, and values that you hold. But if I put a gun to your head and said, "Why did you do everything you did?" Like, you could take the most inane example. You could take driving your car. Why did you decide to slow your speed at that rate instead of some other rate? Why did you stop at this distance from the light as opposed to that distance from the light? I could ask you a myriad of questions, and you couldn't give me an answer to them, right? You would just say, seemed like the right thing to do, right? And so a large part of our life is ineffable. And so you have this ineffable, articulated, measurable partition. So what's the measurable part? The measurable part is the things which are not only articulated, but that we also can measure. And so great examples would be width, height, what's the third dimension? Length, I suppose, would be the third one there. There are things that we can measure, and that is the purview of science. And so just like with the partition between facts and values, the facts were the purview of science and the values were the purview of morality. You can take both of those, facts and values, and you can split each of them into 3 different partitions. And the measurable part of each of those things is the purview of science. The articulated part is the purview of philosophy. And then the ineffable part is the purview of emotion, and it's the purview of the heart. And I don't really know a better way to discuss these things. And so here's the thing is, so last time when we were talking, you said, how can I know? How can I know if I'm doing the right thing? And my answer to you is that you don't. You don't get to know with the same sense of certainty that you know the Pythagorean theorem. What you do get is that you know in the same way that you know in any other relationship. And so we talk, obviously we were talking about moral stuff last time, which is your relationship with God, but this is true in every relationship. That you love your wife, yes.
Yes.
Don't just nod. No one
yeah.
can see that.
So now, just to push back on this a little bit, I think I understand what you're trying to say, but there are things that you do in any type of normal friendship. There are things you do in marriage that are universally proper ways to act in that type of relationship.
That's true, but the word proper, again, is an appeal to an ought, right? It's an appeal to a sense of perfection, a sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. And so I think what you're observing there is that, and Lewis observes this, for instance, in The Abolition of Man, when he makes reference to the Tao at the end of the book, maybe in the appendix, in that, in the same way that, for instance, almost every culture has like a prohibition on theft and murder and stuff like that, right? It's the same thing. And so I think what you're observing is that people everywhere, for whatever reason, Romans 1 would say the law of God is written on our hearts, have observed that there is a certain ought. There is an ought to how you should conduct yourself in relationships. And yes, I agree with you. But the ought that they are observing is the ought that, to the extent that they get it right, is the ought that exists in the mind of God. It is the ought of that which expresses the purpose for which they were created, in particular with respect to that relationship.
So I think the reason that it's important is just as a baseline, is because when you have someone who's saying, okay, I'm going to stop living my life the way that I want to live it, and I'm going to go along with what you guys say, Jesus is God, and I'm going to, start following the Christian God. Where do I start? And as with a child, when I have an 18-month-old, and when she does something wrong, we tell her this is wrong.
Sure.
That is where her mind is starting to be able to process things. You go, daughter, this thing is wrong, don't do it.
Yep.
And we've also been trying to do the flip side. Instead of telling her, no, don't do it, we try to say, okay, your fork goes on your plate. Instead of saying, don't throw it on the ground, we say, put it on your plate.
Yes.
Yeah. And the thing is we don't
That is the purpose for which the fork was created.
Yeah. We don't explain to her why. We don't go, there could be germs on the floor, or there could be dirt on the floor, or we don't go into the deep understanding. So when you are first a Christian and you're interacting with something like the Ten Commandments, which you don't necessarily have to be a Christian to acknowledge is true, but it is this is the covenant that God made with us originally, right?
Yeah.
And it is just, it's a great place to start. But understanding that this is what God wants for you, even if, philosophically, why should I not lie? Mm-hmm. Well, is that a question that is worth your time to figure out how to answer necessarily? Maybe if you really struggle with lying, why should I not commit adultery? Well, maybe if you really struggle with fornication, maybe you do need to go a little bit deeper into that. But there is a sense in where there are some basic precepts that, we should be able to just accept, and know that those precepts, if we live our life by them, are going to produce positive results, and they are going to point us closer to, for example, what we were created to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, so I think that the answer to that is somewhat straightforward, which is that it's the, like, so, you know, why should I not lie? Why should I not fornicate or commit adultery or whatever? I don't think that 10 Commandments are true. I think that they are true in the sense that they are not records. They are expressions of what God wills for you. And the answer why you should do them, again, I guess I don't even frame it as a should. I mean, there is a should in the sense that the should is defined by what God wills. What I offer you is the alternative. Because again, we're talking about action.
When you
here.
say that they're not true, what do you mean?
What I mean is that in the same way imperative statements aren't true. So if I say, go get the butter out of the refrigerator, that's not a proposition. It's not true or false. It's an imperative.
Okay.
Go get the butter. Mm-hmm. In the same way, the 10 Commandments are imperatives. Don't do this.
Yes.
Do this.
Mm-hmm.
The truth behind them is that they are expressions of what God wills. So the proposition, is this an expression of what God wills? Yes.
Okay.
That's the true statement. But they're imperatives, and imperatives aren't propositional. So what I offer people is kind of what we offered last week, or last episode, which is that you can do whatever you want, but recognize that you're living in a world that was constructed for a purpose. And whenever you act with a purpose, of necessity, some things there are constraints that are placed on you. And when you act against purpose, you typically cause harm. And so the easiest example is grasping a knife by the blade. The knife was constructed for a purpose. There's nothing nefarious going on there. And yet, if you act against the purpose of the knife, you can harm yourself. In the same way, for instance, in the same way, you learn this as a child, right? Which is when you hand the knife to someone, you grasp it by the flat of the blade and extend the handle, right? And that's to prevent the harm of the recipient. And it's the same thing with the 10 Commandments. It's the same thing with any commandment.
Would you say it's an accurate statement to say that the imperatives that God lays out in the Bible are eternally reliable from the perspective that if you live your life by those imperatives and take them seriously, you will be closer to fulfilling your purpose. You will be living a better life if you do those things.
Yes, but that's the faith. That's the faith article here, right? Is that God tells the truth.
Yes.
Because maybe God designed the world in a certain way, but he's also kind of a malevolent fellow, and so he tells us all sorts of lies that have nothing to do with the structure of the universe. And then, as again going back to Pacino, sits there laughing as we go banging into walls and harming ourselves. Kind of like a 12-year-old playing Sims.
I do think
when he bricks in a citizen and they starve to death.
And we would have to get into the specific things that Jesus said, but if we just take it back to 10 Commandments for a hot second.
Sure.
I think that the vast majority of people who probably don't even know what the 10 Commandments are anyway.
Yeah.
If you gave them like a little survey and you said, okay, if everyone obeyed their parents, didn't lie, wasn't greedy, didn't commit adultery, didn't cheat on their, significant other. What am I leaving out at the back end? Anyway.
Well, we're 3 or 4 deep, man. You got a little ways to go.
Yeah. I wasn't going for the first 4, but anyway, I guess what I'm saying is just that, those basic ones.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Theft, deceit, covetousness, murder.
Yeah. Oh, murder, right. But everyone would say the world would be a better place if people lived their lives by those precepts.
Yeah.
So I think where Christianity gets kind of interesting is that Jesus, and we talked about this a little bit, we don't have to get to this in this episode, is Jesus takes those precepts one step further, right? He expands on them, gets a little bit deeper with them. I think where the whole will of God conversation comes in and is frustrating for, like, in the situations we grew up in, is because it gets applied to things like life decisions.
Yeah.
You know, who am I supposed to marry? What is my career supposed to be?
What city am I going to live in?
What city am I going to live in? And back to, you know, what I was talking about earlier with the interview I listened to.
Blue tie or red tie?
I think one question, and you can give me your feedback on this, Ian,
Sure.
is one good question you could be asking yourself is, do I want to become a more sanctified person?
Mm-hmm.
And sanctified basically just means, you know, do I want to become, you know, more free of sin? Do I want to get closer to God? So, you know, that's kind of like Christianese speak for, you know, that kind of concept. But if I ask myself, okay, do I want to become a more sanctified person? Then things like what job I do I want to get married? If it's put into that concept, we're saying, okay, I want to marry a person, but is the point that I'm trying to marry that person is because I want to become a more sanctified person? Because when you get in a relationship like a marriage, it's going to be very difficult. You're taking two people, different worldviews, different upbringings,
Different sets of experiences.
and different sets of values, and you're crashing them together.
Hopefully
And-
the values are somewhat.
Yeah, somewhat similar. But
Yeah.
I guess what I would say is in those situations, and I don't know anyone who's married who hasn't dealt with this before, is that you inevitably have to sacrifice and try to meld your life together in a very sacrificial way, I guess. And you fundamentally change as a person when you go through that process.
Sure.
And so, if the point of that, and I don't think in the secular society they see something like marriage in that way.
No.
Like the whole point of marriage is to become a better person from the perspective of I'm gonna take my life, I'm gonna put it aside what I was doing, and I'm gonna start sacrificing it for this other person. In the process of doing that, I'm gonna fundamentally change. Like the things that I did before I was married compared to what I do now, or the person I am, or the ways that being married has, helped me out, I could, ring off a long list. But there's a lot of things I cut out of my life. Like there's a lot of, positive aspects to marriage, but then there's a lot of stuff I cut out of my life, and things I can't do for myself anymore that I did like to do. For example, I used to like to watch South Park. Not on the table anymore.
Sure.
But most people are, see something like marriage as I want to have my needs met.
Right, yeah.
And that's not what it is. So if you don't see it as becoming more sanctified, then it's not gonna be a pleasant experience, because that's not what the purpose of marriage is. The purpose of marriage is not to have your emotional, spiritual, physical needs met. Even though that might be a byproduct,
Right.
it's not a the ultimate goal. And I think the same thing could be said for like a career, in the like what you're saying about how God created us for a purpose. A career is about taking the skills that you have and applying them in some positive way to the world around you. And in that case, there's a lot of careers that there wasn't like one career out there for me.
Right.
Necessarily.
Yeah.
But the question you have to ask yourself is what I'm doing in my career going to create positive value for other people? What else? I don't know. I mean, but I feel like, most people see a career as, once again, as self-serving. It's like, well, which career can I pick that's going to make me the most money and provide me the most personal fulfillment? Your dream job.
Your dream job.
The dream job is stupid. Stupid concept.
Agreed.
Like there's things that I would love to do for money.
Ice cream taster.
Ice cream taster, right? I'd love to write. We've talked about this a zillion times.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fun things that I wish I could do for money. But that isn't necessarily, I didn't become a mechanical engineer because it's my passion.
Mm-hmm.
There's some people who do. There's some people who become engineers because they love cars and they love, I don't know, airplanes. I don't know. I became a mechanical engineer because I'm pretty decent at math. I'm pretty good at problem solving. I can apply myself in the workforce and in that way.
Yeah.
And I like having a positive effect on people. Do I love doing this stuff? No. You know?
Well, that's somewhat similar to your grandfather, right? He comes to this
Yeah.
country, he's like, gonna be an accountant.
Absolutely.
Did you ever get the feeling like, Nate, when I was 6 years of age and I learned about double entry bookkeeping, I just knew.
Well, you know, what's interesting about my grandfather, and this is a great story, is that he was very passionate about his work, but he always saw his work as a means to an end to do other cool stuff in life.
Exactly.
But he also enjoyed work. Like, he came up in the 50s when they were just starting to use computers, and, you know, the computers that he was using was as big of a room.
Right.
And they had a guy.
Did he actually use punch cards?
Yes.
Dope.
So this is the first punch card project that he did.
Yes.
This is like when he first got hired in. So there was this guy at Goodyear who his whole job was to make payments to vendors. Okay. And this guy was months and months behind.
Oh, is this the same guy that paid the guy from The Chosen?
No. But anyway, so my grandfather came up with this idea. He's like, okay, there's these thousands and thousands of invoices we got to get out to these vendors. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, you know, a code for each vendor, and then I'm going to punch in the amount of money that goes with each invoice and put an invoice number on there, or whatever the thing was, and I'm going to put these in punch cards. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the punch cards and I'm going to have computers sort them largest to smallest. And anything under 35 cents, whatever it was back in the day, we're just not going to pay.
Right.
We're going to write it off because it's not worth our time to have this guy write out an invoice.
Right.
And that project took him like a month, sitting there punching punch cards. But then he did it. He fed it through the computer, and he's like, "I made this guy's job 100 times easier."
Yeah,
Now we're caught up on vendor invoices.
Yep.
And he flipped that around to, you know, like I said, going to Europe. They were setting up new computers and Goodyear's, you know, different places in Europe. And so my grandfather took that job and took the kids, and they left Akron and they went to Fulda, Germany. You know. Right outside the Fulda Gap, where if they ever would in World War III, that's where it would have started. And the guy, it was a Weekend at Bernie's situation. His boss was an alcoholic who never came to work.
That's awesome.
And so,
can you still do that?
Yeah. And so
Excellent.
my grandpa would just do the things, and he became this, you know, indispensable person essentially.
Oh,
you know?
That's the best place to be.
And here's the best part. And when they were over there in Europe, especially, he didn't have to. Everything got paid for. Housing got paid for. The kids' schooling got paid for. So he just banked all the money, invested it, came back, pretty wealthy man.
Yeah.
You know, and one thing he really brags about, and I would not be bragging about this, is he said, "Goodyear was so good to me, I never asked them for a raise."
Oh.
And I'm like, Reinhardt, I don't know. You know, different world. But like my grandfather, but he wasn't like this type of guy who's like, I'm going to go work 60 hours a week.
Right.
Like he enjoyed his job. He had a lot of fun doing numbers.
Yeah.
You know, but it wasn't like, he's like the perfect example of how to have a healthy relationship with your career, in my mind. You know, and that's what I try to do in my career. I try to have a good time. I try to, you know, come up with new stuff, be creative, and add value to the people I'm working for. Yeah. And then, you know, well, once I hit 40 hours on the week, it's...
I shut it down.
I shut it down. Shut it down. Yep. So, anyway, a long about round way of saying, like, God's will, I don't think pertains to, you know, exactly who you should marry, exactly what you should be doing with your life. I think what you need to be asking yourself is, are you trying to... become a more sanctified person? I think that's one question that you could be asking yourself that could help you with that issue.
I agree with that conclusion. I somewhat disagree with the idea that it doesn't pertain to where you should live or to whom you should marry, because I think, so again, in practical terms, I think of sanctification as sanctification is practically the slow changing or mutation of your own value hierarchy to mirror that of God for you.
Oh, I am not saying that it doesn't matter who you marry.
I know you're
Let
not
me
saying
be clear
that.
about
I
that.
know you're not saying that, but I guess my point is that if that's what sanctification is, if sanctification is the slow transition of your we'll say unsanctified,
Yes, yes.
or
I'd agree with that definition.
like stop time, take a snapshot of your value hierarchy when you're regenerated, right? When you're saved or something like that. Smoking and drinking and maybe church, or something like that. Like that's the value hierarchy when you're regenerated. And then slowly over the course of your life, it starts to change and become and cohere, converge to God, to the purposes for which God has created you. So that's how I think of sanctification. And then so under that rubric, if you're asking the question, if you're constantly trying to answer the question, what are the purposes for which I've been created? The answer to that question is going to have implications then on your career and who you marry.
Correct, yes.
And so I'll give a very stupid example, but I give this to people sometimes when having these kinds of discussions, which is that, so my background, I'm a mathematician. I apply my craft in the area of statistics, data science, whatever. And I could theoretically go and work for some pornographer and, tally visits to the website, right? And like, oh, these videos really seem to be going gangbusters. Let's promote them, or something like that. And I would make money doing that, and it would be an application of mathematics and statistics and predictive models and all that stuff. But I would never do that because I'm fairly certain that those were not the purposes for which I was created, to inflame
Now, do you
lust.
know
And,
that because of the implicit commands? Like, why do you
well,
think
I mean, so
you know
in
that?
in that particular, well, okay, so in that particular case, I know that because of the
imperatives,
biblical
yeah.
prohibitions against fornication and Christ's command to not look lustfully after women, and that we shouldn't tempt others. But I mean, that's sort of an obvious low-hanging fruit thing. Obviously, in most of life, the examples are a bit more subtle than that. But nonetheless, it's still, to go back to your previous point, I'm still taking into account the idea of purpose in that it does bleed down into that. And to that end, I have zero idea when you step outside of the faith, when you step outside of this ontic referent of God's will, of God's purpose, when people say, like, I'm just trying to live my best life, or something like that, especially when they're talking about things like marriage or something, it's like, what are you talking about? What would you even know it if you saw it? Mm-hmm. What do you mean?
So let me give you a hypothetical situation. You run into a 17, 18-year-old kid.
Yeah.
They're about to go to college. I don't know. Maybe they're about to get out of high school, and they say, "Okay, Ian, I'm a Christian. I think I'm a Christian. Okay, but I have absolutely no idea what to do with my life. I have absolutely no idea if I even want to get married.
Yeah,
I'm not. I don't even want a girlfriend right now.
Sure,
and I don't even know what I want to do. Period. So what should I do?
Sure.
With my life.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to answer that in a very long way. So we'll come back to that because we'll come back to that. Let me lay out the rubric that I use, the tools that I use. So there's a few ways that I think about such questions, and then we'll get back to the 17-year-old. But just to complete the thought on the ineffable, articulated, measurable partition is that the reason I bring up the measurable part is because sometimes when you speak to people, they act as though you can just calculate your way through life. Like, what should I do? Well, get out the balance sheet, assets and liabilities, and figure out whether or not, a move is a net positive. And you almost never get that because the things that are important in life, few of them are even articulated, much less measurable. And even in the articulated sense, again, the idea that you could write down life as just a bunch of rules. Like, if you just obey these rules, you'll be in good shape. First of all, no one's going to obey them. So
All the time, at least.
right. Because here's the thing is that I think this is actually, brilliant, if you will, with respect to God, which is that he gives you a clue about what you're supposed to do, but he doesn't tell you exactly. Which is good, because if he just told us exactly what to do, we would be bored, and we would immediately not do it, right? And so God gives us clues, but he doesn't give us, he doesn't send us emails like, oh, this is what you're supposed to be up to today. And so now to answer your question more generally, there are a few things I do. And so this is biblically based, but this isn't like a checklist from the Bible. And so I'm going to start this off by saying, Nate, would you please tell the audience about your quizzing scheme?
Bible quizzing scheme?
Yeah.
What about the scheme? What do you mean? You mean like what I used to do?
What you were trying to optimize something with quizzing.
Oh, yes, the schedules.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, what we were trying to do was, we had this quiz bowl program at church, and there was always it was, one team faced off against another team. So maybe for each event, we'd have 10 or 12 different teams. So you'd have like 5 or 6 rooms, and I was always trying to make sure that we had a perfectly balanced schedule. Whereas, the teams that were better, and I would do this on my own, I knew which churches had, kids who were better prepared than others. So, if there was 12 teams and 6 rounds, then you obviously don't get to play each team. So I would have a schedule where, the better teams played each other more often than the lesser teams, and then the lesser teams played each other more often. So everyone, kind of had a pretty good chance of doing well. But then the other thing I wanted them to do is be able to be in the most rooms possible, so that they're not in the same room with the same, the person who asked the questions was called the quiz master. So it's like, I don't want you to have the same quiz master 4 times. Like, at the most, maybe you have one of them twice, so, but doing that type of schedule optimization with all those different constraints by hand was impossible. So I created this combinatorics numerical algorithm that locked those different schedules in. So I would say, okay, these are my parameters. I run it through this R script and would spit out schedules for me. And I worked on that for a long time because I thought that there would be something like the shortest path thing. Like that's a solved mathematical deal. Like if you want to find the shortest path through a matrix of points, I don't know, there's a way to like multiply the matrices together to get that the lead.
I think it's Prim's algorithm. I'd have to look it up.
Whatever. And I just assumed that for the schedule problem, there would be some type of easy mathematical calculation that you could do to get these schedules, but there wasn't. So you basically had to create this, kind of sorting, pruning tree, which I had never done any of this before, to try to find the, and I, instead of going for most optimal, I went for just give me something that's this good, right? And like learning how to do that was a royal pain, and I had to break down and have Ian explain some math theory to me so that I could actually get somewhere with it. So,
thank you. And now, I did not bring that up to have you praise me in front of both of our listeners, but I'm using it as an example. And for the other example, would you mind telling our listeners about your scheme for Feed My Starving Children?
Oh, yeah. Well, this is actually solved. So,
okay.
In manufacturing, back in the 1880s, the land grant colleges here in the United States, this is something the evil Republicans passed in the 1860s. So we set up a bunch of land grant colleges, like Ohio State, Purdue, all that kind of stuff. And Purdue was a big engineering school, and what they did was they adopted the Russian engineering curriculum, which was the best at the time, and that's what the modern engineering school is based off of back in the 1880s. Well, one of those things was industrial engineering, and that kind of morphed into this efficiency engineering. When you set up a factory, what's the most efficient way to put it together so that you kind of optimize the output? So one of the key concepts there is something called one-piece flow.
My fortune is yours for the taking, but you'll have to find it first. I left everything I own in one piece.
And it's basically the concept that the fastest way to manufacture something is essentially to have the same person or the same amount of resources working on that piece at the same time. Okay, so for example, let's say you have 5 steps in a process. Okay, the first step takes 5 seconds, the second step takes 10 seconds, and the last 3 each take 5 seconds apiece. Well, the fastest that you can get that process done is 10 seconds per part, because the second step is 10 seconds long, and that's your limiting factor. Okay, so with this project at church, this Feed My Starving Children event, basically you make these little meal packs for kids, and they ship them all over the world. And there's a couple different ingredients. You got rice, you got soy, you got some veggies, you got dried veggies, you got some minerals, or I don't know, whatever. It's Vitameatavegamin, basically.
Hello, friends. I'm your Vitameatavegamin girl. Are you tired, run down, listless? Do you poop out at parties? Are you unpopular? The answer to all your problems is in this little bottle.
And so...
Holy smoke, what a reference.
Yeah. So you dump it into a funnel, into the bag, okay? And then you have to weigh it. And then once you get the right weight, you seal it in the bag. Now, obviously, the fastest way to do this would be to have the person who is holding the bag when the food goes in the funnel, that person should weigh it. And then once they weigh it, they should take it immediately over to the sealer, have it sealed, and then go back to the beginning of the line and do another one. Well, the process that they convoluted, this nonprofit organization figured out, was you're going to have 2 people filling the bags, and those 2 people are then going to have each going to have a scale for themselves. And then once they're done with that scale, they're going to put it in a basket. And then they're going to have one person pick up those bags and do the sealing step. The problem is that the step of filling the bags is the shortest step, and you have 2 people doing it. And then you're handing it off to this person who has to seal, and they have to pick it up, and so you're creating inventory in the middle. It's literally the most convoluted process.
They're creating a choke point.
So my thing is, if you just do it the right way, without adding any, just you take the same amount of people that you would have, and you just reorganize the steps, and you just have them do that one-piece flow: fill the bag, weigh the bag, seal the bag. You would double the output immediately. No extra resources. No, you don't have to do anything special. The only thing you do is, instead of having 2 people who are constantly bagging and weighing, you have those 3 people, the 2 weighers and the sealer, get rid of the basket so you're not creating inventory in the middle step. And you just have those 3 people just do, the step in an assembly line. And then go back to the beginning. And when COVID hit, they're sending us these emails saying, hey, we haven't been able to fill these, it's been 3 or 4 months since we've been able to have people at our, sites where we do this all the time, and we need money, but what we really need is volunteers, and we're 4 months behind, and there's kids dying in Haiti. And it's like, okay, look, lady, stop sending me these emails. Here's $20. Why don't you guys just change your process? Because then you can make the same amount of meals with half the amount of volunteers. And I wrote up a white paper. I ran the people in charge at LinkedIn. The person who was in charge of operations, I should say, no longer works there. And I'm assuming because she was the worst. So anyway, I finally get a hold of these people. And I finally get them to respond to me. And they basically say, oh, thank you so much. we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. And they're like, well, stop asking me for money because you guys are idiots. Like if nonprofit, and this goes, I give a lot of money to nonprofit organizations, but I'm telling you, they don't know what they're doing half the time. And it was just very frustrating. But anyway, that's my story.
Okay. So I asked you to relay those stories, and now I'm going to play the following clip.
And he mentioned this. He said, it was something like, you don't choose your interests, they choose you. And that's really worth thinking about too, man, because, it's really hard to get interested in something you're not interested in, even if you know there's a good reason for it. You're studying for an exam, you find the material boring, anything will be more interesting than the studying. Even though you know that that's what you need to do, you can't voluntarily grab yourself by the scruff of the neck, let's say, and shake yourself and say, sit down and concentrate. Your mind will just go everywhere. But then if you're interested in something, and even if it's something you shouldn't be interested in, because that happens all the time, then it's like you're a laser focus, man. You can pay attention forever. You can work until you're exhausted. You won't even notice it, and you remember everything. It's like, okay, if you can't control your interest, what does? And man, I tell you, you can think about that for a very long time. So Jung talked about the spirit Mercurius. Mercury is the winged messenger of the gods. And here's how he conceptualized it psychologically. He thought this is what the ancient people who thought about Mercury as the winged messenger of the gods were trying to state psychologically. Your interest flits around. It's like there's something that captures it and that moves your interest from place to place. Like if you walk into a bookstore, you'll get interested in a particular book. It's as if the book grips you. Because you don't know why you're interested in that. You might, but often you don't know why you're interested in that book. And, your interest is flitting around. And so that's Mercury. The thing that makes your interest flicker around is Mercury, the winged messenger of the gods. And Mercury is the messenger of the gods because it's the things behind the scenes psychologically that are manipulating your attention. And for Jung, those were equivalent in some sense to the lost gods. And so for Jung, your interest was being manipulated behind the scenes by unseen forces that were associated with your characterological development across time. That was the manifestation of the self. So the self is the potential you, let's say. And the way it operates in the present is by gripping your interest and directing it somewhere. And that's part of the instinct of self-realization. It's a mind-boggling idea, man, really. I think it's correct. I can't see how it can't be correct. It doesn't mean I understand it completely, but it certainly seems phenomenologically correct. And I mean, the potential that you are has to manifest itself somehow in the here and now. It has to. And what better way than by directing your attention? It's like, it seems like this might be useful for you, or maybe you get attracted to this person, or maybe you admire this person. That happens with kids a lot. They'll admire someone and then copy them. And you can see that that's obviously part of their developmental progression, right? It's a form of hero worship, but kids are very imitative, and they hero worship at the drop of a hat. And so they're entranced by the next stage of development, and if they see someone who embodies that, especially if it's in the zone of proximal development, it's something they could achieve, stretching a bit. They find someone who embodies that next stage of development, and then they start to imitate them and act like them. Well, adults are no different. We're no different. We do it at a perhaps more abstract and sophisticated level.
So, the reason why I'm playing Peterson, and the reason why I asked you about the scheduling problem and about the Feed My Starving Children problem, is because I knew you would give me those. I knew you would give me those answers. But the final question I have for you about them is there anyone else that cared? Was there anyone else at Feed My Starving Children going, we really need to optimize this process? Was there anyone else in the quizzing going, we really need to solve this scheduling problem?
Well, I would say on the latter, being the Feed My Starving Children thing,
yeah,
I was slightly shocked by how little people cared. But, I think part of that is, in general, human nature and culture, or just organizations, are very hard to change. It's kind of like politics. It's very hard to change something. Even when people know it's a bad policy or it's not a great program or something, it's very hard to change something.
Yeah.
Especially if the people who are in charge have to admit that they're idiots. The quizzing thing actually turned out great because like the last couple of years I was doing that. Now obviously I didn't explain to anyone what was happening, but I could see that, you know.
You mean you just implemented it? And
Oh yeah, I didn't tell anybody what I was doing.
Nice.
It was just, kind
That's
of.
one of the things I like about you. I think we both have that
Mm-hmm.
same forgiveness over permission mindset.
Yeah, but like you could see, like it was just more fun. Everyone got to, it wasn't as drab. All the kids, like I was saying, I was trying to balance the schedules in such a way that the kids who weren't as good would have more opportunities to succeed, and
Right.
the kids who were at the top of the heap would have a more competitive situation. You'd be in more competitive. They weren't just beating up on the Washington. It's just it would be kind of like having a, in the NFL, like if the Kansas City Chiefs had to play, when the Browns were bad, like if Patrick Mahomes had to play the Browns every week, it wouldn't be fun.
Right.
Like you want to play and Patriots aren't good anymore, but you want to see Tom Brady playing Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah.
You want to see Patrick Mahomes playing Joe Burrow. You want to see those top games. So I kind of did that with the Bible quizzing, and it worked out for everybody. And, and the last couple of years we did that. It was a great program. It was a fantastic. So I think the Bible quiz. Now the difference between those two things is that I was in charge of Bible quizzing.
Yeah.
So it was my thing, and so I could do what I wanted with it for the most part.
Right.
So.
But my point to you is simply that you're the only one that really took notice of those things, right? And that's sort of the point that Peterson is making there, is that certain things called to you as needing to be done. No one else, I guarantee you, no one else was writing white papers for Feed My Starving Children, and no one else was coming to me and talking about combinatorics on multiple Saturday mornings to solve scheduling problems. Certain things called to you, and I think that holds true for other people as well. Certain things called to me. And so, for instance, I've given a series, well, it's not a series, I've given the same lecture, but I've given it in multiple places. I gave it at the All Things Open conference, I gave it at an Amazon conference, I gave it an actuarial conference. And one of the points, which I state right up front, is I said, look, I'm trying to solve these certain problems. Everyone says that they need to be solved. So here's my attempt at a solution to it. I'm trying to collaborate with people. Let me know if any of you are interested in trying to solve these things. Everyone loved the lectures. I got good responses every time. I packed the rooms every time. And every time there was no one else who was thinking along these lines. It's just me. And the scheduling was just you. And there are certain things that seem to call to us. And that's what, apparently, I haven't read Jung, but if Peterson's to be believed, that's the idea that Jung was saying. And so I think there's something to be said for, if you will, to go along with Disney and to follow your heart. I don't think it's definitive, but I also don't think it should be ignored. And that's something that sort of bothered me sometimes in the church, because people will speak out of both sides of their mouth. They're like, you really just need to listen to the Holy Spirit. Now, I don't know about you, but the Holy Spirit doesn't come to me and speak audibly. So I assume
the vast majority of the time.
Yeah. So I assume for the most part it's an intuition or it's a feeling, and yet then the next Sunday the preacher will give a sermon about how wicked the human heart is, and who can know it. And you go, well, gee whiz, pal, what am I supposed to do here? And so I think in my mind, the obvious sort of coherence here is that pay attention to your feelings. Your feelings are indicative of what you think is true, although it is not necessarily articulated. And your feelings are indicative of what you value, even if it's not necessarily articulated. The ineffable is a very important piece of that partition, even if it's not, articulated, right? It's not to say that it should be definitive, but it also shouldn't be ignored. And so that is the first piece of my sort of toolkit here. Obviously, God's Word. And so while it's not comprehensive, as any autobiography is not comprehensive. So if you wrote the autobiography of Nathan.
You'd probably land on the schedule problem and Feed My Starving Children, not hear too much else. And poaching deer out of the Summit Metro parks.
Oh, nice. That jerky's delicious. Yeah. But like if I read your autobiography, it wouldn't be the case that, oh well, now I no longer have to talk to Nate because, well, I read the autobiography and what else is there, right? Like everyone would think that'd be stupid. No one would think that if you read someone's autobiography, you automatically know the person. But it helps, right? It helps. And so you asked me why I wouldn't work for, a pornographer. Well, I can read the Bible, and that's pretty straightforward. Now, should I work for the city of Akron? Well, that's a different question. That's not clear from the scripture.
I thought it was very funny how you said hi to the mayor the other day.
Yeah.
And he said hi. And he must know that you're trolling him constantly.
The mayor knows I'm on his case.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, but here's the thing. In my defense, I don't say anything. I think
offensive.
This is true. Yeah, I don't say anything on Twitter that I think is offensive or derogatory. It's certainly negative at times, but I have multiple times on there invited him to a conversation. I said, I'm willing to talk about this, but whatever. It's fine. So that's the first thing. The second thing.
I think what you'll get out of the Bible.
Yeah.
Is we don't have to expand on this too much, but I think what you'll get out of the Bible is it's mostly a story about God interacting with people.
Yeah.
So you're going to see different ways that God interacts with people, and that should be pretty applicable to your life.
Right. Well, at the very least, it's a good first order approximation, right? Is that I think the Bible is sufficient in the sense that it is one of the tools which is indicative of the other tools that God gives you. And so, for instance, then you've got John 16:13, and what does Jesus say? But when he, the Spirit of truth, comes, he will guide you into all truth. For he will not speak of his own, but whatever he hears, he will speak, and he will disclose to you what is to come. And also 1 John 4, verse 1, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see if they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. And so I think everyone's had the experience of different ideas presenting themselves to you, right? What should I do in this situation? Well, I could do this, I could do that, I could do this, I could do that. Test the spirits. Think it through. Is this a good idea? Do I really believe, if I'm acting in good faith, that I think that this corresponds to the purposes for which I've been created, to love God, and love my neighbor, and love myself? So that is sort of the feelings part of it. That's the ineffable part of the trichotomy. Another great one is guilt. So there's two things, guilt and shame. And people, I don't know, guilt and shame get bad names these days. If you ask me, I think our culture could use a lot more of both.
We could use some more honor and shame in this society.
We need more guilt, we need more shame. There's no guilt and no shame anymore. we need more of it.
What's your verses for those?
For guilt, 1 John 3:19, chapter 3, verses 19 through 22. So what does it say there? We will know that we are of the truth, and will set our heart at ease before him, that if our heart condemns us, that God is greater than our heart, and he knows all things. Beloved, if our heart does not condemn us, we have confidence before God. And whatever we ask, we will receive from him, because we keep his commandments and do the things that are pleasing in his sight. And so I guess we should get our definitions straight here. I distinguish between guilt and shame. So guilt I think of as internal, and shame is external. So guilt is me going, Ian, what are you doing? And then maybe I passed the guilt test, but then the shame test is everyone else going, Ian, what are you doing?
I think that's a good way to define those things.
So it's internal versus external. And so, again, yes.
I think the older I get and the more, higher up in this sociological ladder I become. I've become a parent now. People look up to me.
Sure.
Like, shame, maybe it's because I will be less, it's harder for me to come under the judgment of shame. I'm like, man, some of these kids just need to be shamed.
Yes. Well, not just kids, man. Adults need to be shamed.
Adults need to be shamed too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, if your conscience is seared, shame's all you got.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so again, yes, the heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it? Sure, but if your heart is at peace, that's at least it's an indicator, right? Just like at work when you're deciding, was this a good idea for the company or not? You don't take a univariate approach, right? You go, well, let's look at it from this angle, let's look at it from here, let's look at it from here, let's look at it, oh yeah, I guess this looks like a good idea. Yeah, and then shame is the other piece of that. Matthew 18, 15 through 17. If your brother sins, go show him his fault in private. If he listens to you, you've gained your brother. But if he does not listen to you, take one or more with you, so that on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, every matter may be confirmed. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. If he refuses even to listen to the church, he is to be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Taxation is theft. So, again, there's a shame component. Hey, I've got a great idea. This idea calls to me. I'm feeling good about it. Oh, Nate came knocking on my door.
Yeah.
Going, Ian, what are you up to? So that's another thing. So if something calls to you that needs to be done, you're solving practical problems. I'm trying to solve data scientific problems. If my heart's at ease, no one's saying, Ian, this is stupid. You're wrecking your life. Okay, these things seem to be going okay. I think another thing to keep in mind is dispersion of talents. So 1 Corinthians 1:12. There are varieties.
Chapter 12, not 1:12.
Oh, yeah, sorry. 1 Corinthians. That's the one, yeah. 1 Corinthians 12. There are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are varieties of ministries, but the same Lord. There are varieties of effects, but the same God who works in all persons. To each one is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. And so therefore we see the coming together of the singular and the multiple, the individual and the corporate. And so I think last time you posed the question to me, aren't some things objectively good? And one of them was like taking water to, thirsty children or something like that. And my answer is no. Things aren't necessarily objectively good, other than, again, trying to fulfill the purposes for which God created you. And an easy counterexample to that is, no, you shouldn't be taking water to thirsty children if it means you are neglecting your wife and child.
Well, I don't think that's the assumption in the act.
Well, but that's...
I mean, you can make that type of thing. You could say, well, something can't be good because you could also be doing something bad at the same, or, like you said, something bad at the same time. I'd really push back on that. That for example, helping out the poor is not just objectively a good thing to do. Now, but the thing is, for example, and Jesus even talks about this. He talks about, don't say I can't take care of my parents. It's korban because I'm giving money to the temple.
Right.
Well, obviously, giving money to church is a calling. It's something we're supposed to do. It's objectively good, But like, if we're sinful and there's some type of sinful motivation behind it, then it isn't good anymore.
Well, but I guess my point is that it's not a binary thing. It's not that you're giving or you're not, and it's good or it's not. It's that there are ways to give properly and there are ways to give improperly. There are ways to transport water properly and there are ways to transport water improperly.
But in the most general sense.
Action is at the level of detail. I can't answer it in the most general sense.
Okay, well, we'll just move on.
You're working for your charity night and day. You're not paying attention to your wife and child.
Yes, that's not right.
Okay. But it's for a good... I understand the motivation, sure. But the whole reason I bring up the 1 Corinthians thing there is that there is a way, and I think, and again, this is an article of faith, I can't prove this, but I think that there is a way with a dispersion of talents that exist, that water can get to those children, and we can love our family. And so,
I would agree.
a stupid example again would be something like, should Warren Buffett go and push a broom on the street or something like that? It's like, well, no. Warren Buffett should take the time that he was going to use to help clean the streets and make a ton of money and then pay 10 people to go push brooms on the street. That would be a much better allocation of resources.
I was just, this was actually a really good one. Ivanka Trump just did an interview on the Lex Friedman podcast.
Yes, I saw that. I didn't see the interview. I saw that she did it.
So one of the he asked her about how she's not going to be involved in the upcoming Trump administration. And she said, I decided that at this point in my life, first of all, I want to be a good mom. It's for the kids. I don't want to give another 4 years to that.
Sure.
And lose it. With the kids. But then she also said something very profound, which I was thinking the whole time. Ian's gonna love this. Is that she's like, and he pushed back on that a little bit, and then he said basically, but you could do so much good for the world in that position.
Mm-hmm,
and she's like, well, I understand that it's a kind of a unique way to operate, but the kids, I'm with my kids, and we also do like volunteering. We're more involved in our community, and that in some ways is just as much of a good. And she was actually pointing out that sometimes we overemphasize the big level stuff, but the stuff right next to you, what's going on in your community, is also super important, and we need to focus on that.
See, you just argued my point about the water for me.
So what I just found very profound about that, the perspective on it, I thought was fantastic.
Yeah,
where this idea where, the local, obviously, you're going to do, wherever you're at in the world, your neighbors, your town, your city, you're going to be able, your church, you're going to have so much more effect on those people than whatever, the rest of the country, or something like that. Because you know them. Yeah. Even if you decide to run for high office, like, how many members of Congress can you name off the top of your head? And even if you could name them, if you could name one thing that they've done, let alone whether you thought that was good or bad.
Right.
It's pointless. But we know plenty of people here in this town, and we can say, oh, I know this person, and I know what they're actively involved with here, and I know what good it's doing for Akron, Ohio.
Yeah.
And so, but anyway, I thought that was very good.
Yeah, I totally agree with her. But yeah, I guess that underscores the point, which is that there's, when you talk about doing good, again, people think about talking about doing good as binary. You're either doing good or doing bad, but that's not true. There is a myriad of different goods you could be doing, and there is a best among them. I had this thought the other day that, so you've got the injunction in the Shema in Deuteronomy 6 that we're supposed to remember, right? We're supposed to remember, teach them to your kids, write them on the doorpost of your house, this, that, and the other thing. And to a certain extent, in practical terms, it's like, I think that incremental progress is almost of necessity the only way you can do things properly. Because once you've taken the time to love yourself and your God and your family, you've got maybe 4 hours left in the week, right?
Yeah.
And so, you do the best you can with those 4 hours, but you're just not going to move a mountain immediately, right? And so I think that it's almost like cancer, right? Like cancer is, if you will, perverse growth, right? It's inordinate growth. And I think that if you ever see something that's sort of growing, and I'm not saying it can't happen, but say like a rule of thumb, that if something is moving forward quickly, I would almost be willing to bet that there's someone in that movement who's not attending to what's right in front of them, whether it be themselves, their relationship with God, their family, or whatever. And that's why I think sometimes you see why celebrities and people who are, say, high up, that their lives are often fraught with broken relationships, is that sort of pace of life comes with a price, right? And that gets back to the other point that everything's a trade-off. You can do whatever you want, but you can't get away from the fact that there is a structure to this world.
And that even gets back to the politics thing. A bunch of radical, quick change most likely isn't going to be beneficial because that's not the way change is supposed to take place.
Right.
I think that's what's amazing about the United States Constitution is that it makes change relatively difficult to make, but that's actually a good guardrail because that's the way that we operate. Humans operate. We don't. And who's not to say that radical change isn't, most of the time it's nefarious anyway, what people are trying to foist on you.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like mail-in absentee ballots.
Right. Never tried this before. Okay. And so to finish up, I want to address...
We got to go back to the 17-year-old before we finish.
Yeah, we will. But there's this last point here, and again, it's very practical, which is that, okay, so we've gone through, all right, well, what calls to you? What needs to be done? Again, you've got James who says, so for the one who knows the right thing and does not do it, for him it is sin. You've got these things calling to you. It seems like they need to be done. Okay, check your heart. Are you at peace with it?
Are you saying that they can know what the right thing is, Ian?
I'm saying they can intuit, they can feel it. And it's one of multiple markers that they are on the path. Things call to them. Then you check your heart. How do I feel about this? Am I at peace with it, or does it seem like a bad idea? Is there any guilt associated to it? So, and then there's the shame aspect. The positive version of shame is seeking the counsel of others, right? Seeking wise counsel. What are other people thinking about this? Hey, I think I'm going to go do this. Some people will be like, wow, that's a good idea. And other people are like, what, are you out of your mind? Have you thought about this, that, and the other thing? But maybe you passed that test. So things call to you. You check your heart. It feels good. Other people go, yep, seems like a good idea. What you're proposing seems to work with the dispersion of talents around you. Everything seems on board. But you can still ask the question, what if I get it wrong? Well, this is the practical implication of forgiveness. The practical implication of forgiveness is, if you get it wrong, you're not totally screwed for eternity. It's that, in light of forgiveness, forgiveness is what makes getting up and trying again a rational thing to do. Because if there was some sort of limit on the number of mistakes you could make, then once you hit that limit, which again, as we discussed the vastness of our ignorance previously, you're absolutely going to hit, then it wouldn't make any sense whatsoever to continue to try to act in some sort of ordinate fashion. And so for this, relying heavily on John tonight, 1 John 1:9, if we confess our sins, he is faithful in righteousness, so he will forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And then we think again of the parable of the prodigal son, right? Which is, there's sort of two ways you can make a mistake. One is ignorance, the other is volitional. Mistakes are one thing. The parable of the prodigal son is clearly volitional. And yet you still have the love of a father, right? Who stands there with his arms open, always ready to accept the repentant son. And so, in my mind, that is at least a practical implication of the doctrine of forgiveness, is that the doctrine of forgiveness is the rational foundation on which you can base ordinate action even in the presence of mistakes. And so then to answer the question of the 17-year-old, my answer to the 17-year-old is that ignorance is the general position. Ignorance is like poverty. It's the general condition. Certainty is the exception. And so if I'm speaking to a 17-year-old, I would just simply say, well, what are the things that call to you? What are the things that you notice that need attention, to which no one else is paying attention? All right. Now take a subset of those things. Which of those things will pay money? Because, man, Paul said, if you ain't working, you ain't eating. And then go and do it. And just know ahead of time. Are you going to make mistakes? You're totally going to make mistakes. that's part of. So I only have a few rules for my department. One of them is make your mistakes cheaply. And
Fast and cheap.
Fast and cheap. Oh, I've got a great idea. Great. Let's try it on a toy data set somewhere out of production and go see how well it works. Oh, it blew up. Okay, but did we learn anything? Yeah, well, we learned this and that. Okay, well, solve the problem and try again. Go through a few iterations of that. It works on a small data set. All right, well, let's try a larger one. Let's try a larger one. Oh, maybe we can actually incorporate this into production now, right? That's what I would say to them. Because I think when kids are asking that question, they're asking it from the position of they know they're uncertain. They know they don't know. And I think the best thing you can do is reassure them. No one knows, including me, who you're looking to for some modicum of certainty. I don't have it for you. What I have for you is the admission that we're all doing the best we can. And so to proceed with that in mind.
So let's say that the uncertainty comes from a doubt for just religion in general. So you have a 17, 18-year-old that says, Ian, why should I live my life as a Christian as opposed to any other way?
Yeah, well, my answer is, well, what's the alternative? And I mean that in a very sincere way, like not flippantly. I think Christianity's stupid. Great. What in particular? You can't make flippant statements like Christianity's dumb. What in particular? What exactly do you think is dumb? And then what are the alternatives you're proposing? Why do you think those are better? Is there any historical evidence? And what decisions would you make differently? And why do you think that's going to be helpful to you?
Okay, this is my last question.
But before you get to that, there's a specificity that goes along with that. I mean, and we answered a lot of that last time, right? Because last time we had Pacino explaining exactly why he thought all that was a good idea. And the answer is, what we discovered last time is that there's a large temporal element to it, right? So, okay, what's your last question?
So my last question is, okay, Ian, I'm trusting what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go this way. So I'm going to go live my life as a Christian.
Yeah.
In 30 to 60 seconds, can you explain what that is? Living your life as a Christian, what is it?
Yeah, okay. I mean, so then the elevator pitch is, it is constantly trying to answer the question, what does it mean to love my neighbor, love myself, and love God? And when you try to answer that question, and I've done this in practice, which like when you have a meeting at work with someone that you can't stand, and you know it's going to be an unpleasant meeting, I have multiple times prayed prior to it, Father, help me to love this person. And it frames, and it's not like I get, well, Ian, God sends me an email. Well, Ian, you just got to do this, this, and this. But what it does is it frames my thinking about, okay, it doesn't matter if you like this person. This person has a purpose. Try to attend to it. It's trying to answer that question in the detail of the moment, each and every moment of the day. That's vague, but you asked for 20 seconds.
All right.
In any given situation.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
In any given situation, we can talk about the details of it, but that's the 20 seconds.
Well, I think we burnt over this subject. I think I feel good about where we landed. We'll see if
you feel more positive.
I feel more positive than I did last time. So, yeah, I look forward to whatever we're doing next. I don't have anything else to throw at you.
All right.
So.
Well, in that case, I guess Petra will see us out.
This has been another episode of the Steel Creed Show on Earth as it is in heaven.